Ladies and gentlemen, today we're diving into a topic that frustrates and confuses many. Why do men ghost and lie? The hard truth is, it's not always what you think. Let's break it down into 6 key reasons. Avoiding confrontation is one of the most common reasons why men ghost or lie in relationships. Many people assume that when someone disappears or withholds the truth, it's because they are heartless or cruel. But often, the reality is much more complicated. A large number of men struggle with direct communication when it comes to difficult emotional conversations, and rather than addressing their feelings head-on, they choose the path of least resistance, silence, or deception. This avoidance is not always about intentionally hurting the other person. Sometimes it stems from fear, discomfort, or an inability to process emotions in a mature way. From a young age, many men are conditioned to suppress their emotions. Society often teaches boys that expressing vulnerability is a sign of weakness, which means they grow up without the necessary tools to handle deep, honest conversations about emotions and relationships. As a result, when they find themselves in situations where they need to express disinterest, uncertainty, or a desire to move on, they feel overwhelmed and don't know how to navigate these conversations. Rather than risk saying something that could lead to conflict, disappointment, or tears, they choose what seems like the easier option, disappearing. Ghosting is one of the clearest examples of this behavior. When a man suddenly stops responding to texts, ignores calls, or vanishes without an explanation, it's often because he feels uncomfortable addressing the situation directly. He might not have the words to say, "I don't see this working out," or he might assume that telling the truth will only cause more pain. Instead of facing an emotional discussion, he convinces himself that silence is a way to avoid unnecessary drama. But what he fails to realize is that ghosting doesn't make things easier, it makes them worse. The person on the receiving end is left confused, hurt, and questioning what they did wrong. They are forced to create their own closure, which can be much more painful than hearing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Lying also becomes a tool for avoidance in these situations. Rather than being upfront about his true intentions, a man might say things he doesn't mean to keep the peace. He might tell someone, "I'm just really busy with work right now," when the truth is, he's lost interest. He might claim he's not looking for a relationship, even though he knows he's just not looking for one with you. In his mind, these small lies seem like a way to soften the blow, to avoid a scene, or to prevent hurting someone's feelings. But in reality, they often lead to more confusion, false hope, and deeper emotional wounds. Another reason why men avoid confrontation is that they fear being seen as the bad guy. No one likes to be the villain in someone else's story, and many men struggle with guilt when it comes to ending relationships or disappointing someone they once cared about. Rather than taking responsibility for their feelings and being honest about them, they choose avoidance. They tell themselves that by not saying anything, they aren't actively hurting the other person. But in reality, this passive approach is often more damaging. Instead of a clean, honest break, the other person is left in limbo, waiting for answers that may never come. In some cases, a man's avoidance of confrontation is not just about discomfort, it's about self-protection. Some men have had past experiences where honesty led to explosive reactions, intense emotional outbursts, or prolonged arguments. If a man has been in situations where telling the truth resulted in drama, he might develop a habit of dodging difficult conversations altogether. He may have learned that ghosting or telling a small lie helps him escape emotional turmoil, even if it means hurting someone in the process. This behavior doesn't excuse his actions, but it does provide insight into why he might choose avoidance over honesty. There's also a psychological factor at play here. When faced with a difficult conversation, the human brain is wired to choose between fight, flight, or freeze. Many men, when confronted with the need to have a breakup conversation or explain their fading interest, go into a flight response. Their instinct tells them to escape the situation rather than deal with it head-on. This is why some men will stop answering messages, disappear from social media, or even block someone rather than just saying, "Hey, I don't think this is working out." To them, avoidance seems like the easier and safer choice, even though it ultimately causes more harm. It's important to recognize that while avoiding confrontation may be a natural response for some men, it is not an acceptable excuse for their behavior. Emotional maturity means being able to have difficult conversations, even when they are uncomfortable. Ghosting and lying are selfish actions that prioritize a man's comfort over the emotional well-being of the person he's involved with. Everyone deserves honesty, even when the truth is hard to hear. For those who have been ghosted or lied to, it's crucial to remember that this behavior is not a reflection of your worth. When someone disappears or deceives, it says more about them than it does about you. A man who avoids confrontation is showing you his emotional limits. Instead of chasing after answers or trying to change him, it's best to recognize that someone who cannot communicate honestly is not someone you should invest your energy in. The right person will respect you enough to tell you the truth, no matter how difficult the conversation may be. Ultimately, breaking the cycle of avoidance requires a shift in the way men are taught to handle emotions. Encouraging open communication, emotional intelligence, and accountability can help create a culture where honesty is valued over silence. Until then, the best thing you can do is recognize avoidance for what it is, a red flag, and move forward with confidence, knowing that you deserve better. Keeping their options open is one of the main reasons why men ghost or lie in relationships. Many men, especially those who are not ready to settle down, like to keep their dating lives flexible. This doesn't necessarily mean they are bad people, but rather that they enjoy the thrill of possibilities. They like knowing they have multiple options and often fear committing to just one person because it might mean missing out on someone better in the future. This mentality leads them to avoid exclusivity, even if they are already emotionally or physically involved with someone. In today's world of online dating and social media, it has become easier than ever to have multiple options available at any given time. A man can be texting one woman in the morning, swiping through dating apps in the afternoon, and planning a date with someone else in the evening. The ability to connect with so many people at once has made commitment feel less necessary for some men. They may genuinely like a woman, but the idea of settling down with her alone makes them hesitate because they wonder if someone more attractive, more exciting, or more compatible might come along. This behavior can be frustrating for women who feel a strong connection with a man, only to realize that he is keeping things vague or non-committal. He might say things like, "Let's just see where this goes," or "I'm not really looking for anything serious right now." These statements often signal that he is not fully invested, even if he enjoys spending time with her. He wants to keep the door open for other possibilities while still having the benefits of companionship, intimacy, and emotional support. One of the reasons why men keep their options open is the fear of missing out, commonly known as FOMO. This fear makes them hesitant to settle down with one person because they worry that something better might be just around the corner. Instead of committing, they adopt a grass is greener mindset, believing that if they wait long enough, they will find someone who checks even more of their boxes. This kind of thinking prevents them from fully investing in any one relationship because they are always looking at what else is out there. Some men also keep their options open as a form of emotional security. They don't want to put all their energy into one relationship because they are afraid of getting hurt. If they spread their attention across multiple people, they feel less vulnerable. If one relationship doesn't work out, they have others to fall back on. This mindset prevents them from forming deep emotional connections because they are always holding back a part of themselves. They avoid getting too attached to any one person, which makes it easier for them to walk away if necessary. Another reason why men do this is the ego boost they get from knowing multiple women are interested in them. It makes them feel desired, attractive, and powerful. They enjoy the attention and validation that comes from having several people vying for their affection. Even if they are not actively pursuing serious relationships, they like knowing they have options. This can make them hesitant to commit because doing so would mean giving up that constant stream of validation. Unfortunately, many men who keep their options open do not communicate this honestly. Instead of being upfront about their intentions, they lead women on, making them believe they are more invested than they actually are. They might say all the right things, make future plans, or act as if they are exclusive, only to suddenly disappear or pull away when things start getting too serious. This can be deeply confusing and hurtful for the woman involved, as she may have believed they were building something real. In some cases, a man will string someone along for months or even years without ever fully committing. He might say he's not ready for a relationship while still enjoying all the benefits of one. He keeps the woman around just enough to maintain the connection, but never enough to move forward. This allows him to keep his options open while ensuring that he always has someone to turn to when he needs companionship or emotional support. Men who behave this way are often emotionally unavailable, whether they realize it or not. They may not be intentionally trying to hurt anyone, but their actions show a lack of consideration for the feelings of the people they are involved with. Instead of being honest and allowing their partners to make informed decisions, they prioritize their own convenience and desire for flexibility. The best way to deal with a man who keeps his options open is to recognize the signs early on. If he avoids defining the relationship, makes excuses for why he doesn't want to commit, or disappears for days at a time without explanation, it's a red flag. It's important not to settle for someone who treats you as just one of many options. A man who is truly interested and ready for commitment will not hesitate to make that clear. Ultimately, a man who keeps his options open is showing that he is not emotionally ready for a real relationship. He may enjoy the fun and excitement of dating, but when it comes to deep, meaningful commitment, he is not willing to invest fully. Instead of waiting for him to change or hoping he will suddenly decide to commit, it's best to walk away and find someone who values you enough to make you a priority. Many men ghost or lie in relationships because they fear hurting the person they are involved with, or they want to avoid dealing with their own guilt. This may seem like a contradiction, as disappearing or being dishonest ultimately causes more pain. However, in their minds, they justify these actions as a way to avoid direct confrontation and the discomfort of seeing someone else suffer because of their decisions. The truth is, many men are not emotionally equipped to handle difficult conversations, so they choose avoidance instead. When a man realizes that he is no longer interested in someone, he may struggle with how to communicate that truth. He might think about how upset she will be, how she might cry or get angry, or how the conversation could turn into a long and exhausting discussion. Instead of facing these difficult emotions, he takes what seems like the easier route. He disappears. Ghosting becomes a way to avoid the discomfort of seeing someone else in pain. In reality, this doesn't make things easier for the other person. It only leaves them confused, questioning what went wrong, and feeling as though they were not even worth an explanation. The guilt of hurting someone can also lead to lying. A man might say he still cares when he no longer does, or he may act as if everything is fine while emotionally distancing himself. He might make excuses for why he is not calling or spending time together, blaming work, stress, or family issues, when in reality, he is simply avoiding the truth. He convinces himself that lying is the kinder option, that if he slowly withdraws instead of being direct, the other person will get the hint and move on without a painful conversation. But in reality, this kind of behavior is often more damaging. It prolongs the inevitable and makes the breakup even more painful when it finally happens. For some men, guilt plays a significant role in how they handle relationships. They do not want to be seen as the bad guy, so they try to soften the blow by saying things like, "It's not you, it's me," or "I'm just not ready for a relationship right now." While these statements might be partially true, they are often used as a way to escape responsibility. Instead of admitting that they have lost interest or found someone else, they use vague explanations to avoid confrontation and protect their own image. Another reason why guilt affects a man's actions is that he may still care about the person he is leaving behind. Just because he no longer wants to be in the relationship doesn't mean he has no feelings at all. He might genuinely want to avoid causing pain, but instead of being honest, he chooses the path of avoidance. He may think that ghosting or slowly fading away is better than saying, "I don't see a future with us," because he believes that direct honesty will cause unnecessary heartbreak. However, what men often fail to realize is that honesty, even when painful, is always better than deception or silence. While the truth may hurt in the moment, it at least provides closure. Lies, excuses, and disappearing acts leave the other person questioning their worth, wondering if they did something wrong, and struggling with unresolved emotions. In the end, the guilt a man tries to avoid ends up being transferred to the person he left behind. Some men also ghost or lie because they are afraid of dealing with their own emotions. Breakups are not just hard for the person being left, they can also be difficult for the one who is leaving. It is uncomfortable to sit with the knowledge that you have hurt someone, even if it was not intentional. Some men would rather pretend the situation doesn't exist than deal with the emotional consequences of their decisions. They hope that by avoiding the conversation, time will pass, feelings will fade, and they won't have to deal with the aftermath. In some cases, a man may not be intentionally cruel, but rather emotionally immature. He may not have the communication skills or emotional intelligence to handle a serious breakup in a respectful way. Instead of having a direct conversation, he resorts to avoidance, hoping the problem will resolve itself. This is especially common in men who have never learned how to express difficult emotions, or who have always been taught to suppress feelings rather than face them. There are also situations where a man lies to protect himself. He may have promised things in the beginning of the relationship that he can no longer deliver. Maybe he said he wanted something serious, but now he has changed his mind. Instead of admitting this, he keeps up the act because he does not want to be judged or confronted. He tells himself that as long as he doesn't officially break things off, he is not really responsible for hurting anyone. This kind of behavior is not fair, but it is common. Many men fear being labeled as the villain, so they avoid making decisions that could put them in that position. But in doing so, they end up causing even more pain. Instead of being honest about their feelings and taking responsibility for their actions, they try to escape, leaving the other person to deal with the emotional fallout on their own. The best way to handle this situation is to recognize the signs early on. If a man is becoming distant, making excuses, or avoiding serious conversations, it is often a sign that he is struggling with his own feelings. Instead of waiting for him to be honest, it may be necessary to ask direct questions and demand clarity. No one deserves to be left wondering where they stand or why someone disappeared without explanation. At the end of the day, fear of hurting someone should never be an excuse for dishonesty or avoidance. True respect comes from facing difficult conversations head-on, even when they are uncomfortable. Ghosting and lying may seem like easy ways out, but they only create more pain in the long run. A man who truly values integrity will choose honesty, even when it is hard, because he understands that real closure and healing can only come from the truth. Many men ghost and lie in relationships because of immaturity and a lack of emotional intelligence. This behavior is not necessarily driven by malicious intent, but rather by an inability to handle difficult emotions and communicate effectively. Emotional intelligence involves understanding one's own emotions, recognizing how actions affect others, and having the ability to navigate challenging situations with honesty and empathy. Unfortunately, not all men develop these skills, which leads them to take the easy way out, disappearing without explanation or lying to avoid confrontation. Immaturity plays a major role in how men handle relationships. Some men have never learned how to process their emotions in a mature way. Instead of dealing with discomfort, they choose avoidance. This could be because they have never been taught how to express themselves properly, or because they have been conditioned to suppress their emotions rather than face them. When a man lacks emotional maturity, he sees relationships as something to enjoy when they are easy, but abandon when they become complicated. He does not think about the emotional impact of his actions because he is focused on his own feelings and convenience. Many men are not taught how to deal with difficult conversations from a young age. Some men grow up in environments where emotions are not openly discussed. They may have been told to man up or stop being emotional, leading them to believe that vulnerability is a weakness. As a result, when they are faced with emotional discomfort in a relationship, they don't know how to handle it. Instead of talking about their feelings or explaining why they want to leave, they simply ghost or lie. They hope that if they disappear or make up excuses, the problem will go away on its own. Lack of emotional intelligence also affects how men perceive relationships. Some men do not fully understand how their actions impact others. They may think that ghosting or lying is a harmless way to avoid drama, not realizing that it leaves the other person feeling confused, rejected, and emotionally wounded. Because they are not in tune with their own emotions, they fail to recognize the depth of pain they cause. They may justify their actions by saying, I didn't want to hurt her, or she'll move on eventually, without truly acknowledging the emotional toll of their behavior. Another sign of emotional immaturity is the inability to handle accountability. When a man lacks emotional intelligence, he struggles to take responsibility for his actions. Instead of admitting that he has lost interest or made a mistake, he avoids the conversation altogether. He does not want to face an emotional reaction, so he chooses the path of least resistance, ghosting or telling lies, to avoid conflict. This is not because he is necessarily a bad person, but because he lacks the maturity to deal with uncomfortable situations in a responsible way. Some men also ghost or lie because they are impulsive and struggle with long-term thinking. Emotional intelligence requires the ability to consider the consequences of one's actions, but immaturity often leads men to act in the moment without thinking about the future. When they are no longer interested in a relationship, instead of handling the situation properly, they take the easy way out because it feels less stressful at that moment. However, they fail to see that their avoidance only causes more harm in the long run, both for the person they ghosted and for themselves. Lack of emotional intelligence also affects how men handle breakups. A mature man understands that ending a relationship should be done with honesty and respect. He knows that while it may be uncomfortable, having an open conversation provides closure and allows both people to move forward in a healthy way. However, an emotionally immature man does not see the value in this. He is more concerned with avoiding discomfort than with doing what is right. He may ghost because he does not want to deal with tears or questions, or he may lie because he thinks it will make the situation easier for himself. In some cases, men who ghost or lie do so because they lack the ability to process their own emotions. They may not even understand why they feel the way they do, so instead of addressing their emotions, they run away from them. For example, a man might start losing interest in a relationship but not know why. Instead of reflecting on his feelings and communicating them honestly, he avoids the conversation because he cannot put his emotions into words. Ghosting or lying becomes a way to escape a situation he does not fully understand himself. Another factor is that emotional intelligence requires empathy, the ability to put oneself in another person's shoes. Men who lack this skill do not take the time to consider how their actions affect others. They focus only on what is easiest for them without realizing that the person they are leaving behind will be left with unanswered questions and emotional distress. A man who has empathy understands that ghosting or lying is not fair to the other person. Even if it is easier for him, he chooses honesty because he values the other person's feelings, even if it means having a difficult conversation. It is also important to recognize that immaturity and lack of emotional intelligence do not necessarily mean someone is a bad person. Some men genuinely do not know any better because they have never been taught how to handle relationships in a healthy way. However, this does not excuse their actions. Everyone has the responsibility to grow and learn from their mistakes. A man who continues to ghost or lie without making an effort to improve is choosing to remain emotionally immature. For those who have been ghosted or lied to, it is important to understand that this behavior is a reflection of the other person's emotional limitations, not their own worth. When a man chooses to disappear instead of communicating, it is because he does not have the maturity or emotional intelligence to handle the situation properly. It is not because the person he ghosted was unworthy of closure or respect. The solution to this issue is growth. Emotional intelligence is not something people are born with. It is a skill that can be developed. Men who struggle with emotional maturity need to recognize their patterns and make an effort to change. They need to learn how to communicate their feelings openly, take responsibility for their actions, and develop empathy for others. This means having difficult conversations even when they are uncomfortable, and understanding that honesty is always better than avoidance or deception. Ultimately, ghosting and lying are signs of emotional immaturity, but they do not have to define a person forever. Growth is possible for anyone who is willing to put in the effort to develop emotional intelligence. The more men learn to communicate openly, handle relationships with responsibility, and consider the impact of their actions, the less common these behaviors will become. In the end, emotional maturity leads to healthier relationships, deeper connections, and greater respect for both oneself and others. Some men ghost and lie in relationships simply because they got what they wanted, whether it was attention, validation, intimacy, or even just the excitement of the chase. Once they feel they have satisfied their desire, they no longer see a reason to stay. This mindset can be incredibly frustrating and hurtful for the person left behind. But understanding why this happens can help provide clarity. When a man disappears after getting what he wanted, it is often because he was never truly invested in the relationship to begin with. Instead, he was pursuing a goal, whether conscious or subconscious, and once he reached it, his interest faded. One of the most common reasons men ghost after getting what they wanted is that they were only interested in the thrill of the chase. Some men enjoy the process of pursuing someone, putting in effort to gain their attention, and experiencing the excitement of winning them over. However, once they feel they have secured the other person's affection, the excitement disappears. They may not have even considered what comes next because their motivation was never about building something long-term. Instead of continuing to invest in the relationship, they leave because the challenge is gone and they no longer feel the same level of excitement. For others, the motivation may be physical or emotional validation. Some men seek relationships not for genuine connection, but for a sense of accomplishment or self-worth. They may enjoy the feeling of being wanted, the ego boost that comes with someone being interested in them, or the physical intimacy that a relationship provides. Once they have received that validation, they may feel no further incentive to stay. They were never in it for the relationship itself, but rather for what they could gain from it in the moment. Once they have fulfilled that need, they see no reason to continue investing effort. Another factor is that some men enter relationships with a short-term mindset. They may not necessarily set out to hurt someone, but they also do not think far enough ahead to consider the consequences of their actions. Instead of asking themselves, what do I want from this relationship long term, they only focus on what they want in the present. This leads them to act in ways that seem selfish or inconsiderate because they are not thinking about how their actions will affect the other person down the line. Once they get what they want, they do not feel a sense of obligation to stay because they never saw the relationship as something that required long-term commitment. For some men, ghosting or lying after getting what they wanted is a way to avoid responsibility. Ending a relationship properly requires a level of emotional maturity that not everyone possesses. Instead of having an honest conversation about their feelings or admitting that they are no longer interested, they choose to disappear. This allows them to avoid awkward or uncomfortable discussions, but it leaves the other person feeling hurt and confused. In some cases, men may even lie about their intentions to get what they want in the first place, making false promises or leading someone to believe that they are more invested than they actually are. This behavior is especially common in men who view relationships in a transactional way. If they see relationships as something to win rather than something to nurture, they will approach them with the mindset of taking rather than giving. These men often prioritize their own desires without considering the emotional impact of their actions on others. They may justify their behavior by thinking, I never promised anything serious, or she'll move on eventually, without acknowledging that they created expectations through their actions. In their minds, once they have taken what they came for, their involvement is over, and they do not see a reason to provide closure or explanation. Some men ghost or lie after getting what they wanted because they are afraid of confrontation. They know that if they were to be honest about their intentions, they might face anger, disappointment, or emotional reactions that they do not want to deal with. Rather than facing the consequences of their actions, they take the easy way out by disappearing. They convince themselves that ghosting is a cleaner way to exit, even though it often causes more pain than simply being honest. This avoidance is not about protecting the other person's feelings. It is about protecting themselves from discomfort. Another layer to this behavior is that some men are simply not looking for emotional depth in a relationship. They may be emotionally unavailable or unwilling to form deeper connections. If they got what they wanted and then left, it could be because they were never interested in developing a strong emotional bond. For them, relationships are not about building something meaningful, but rather about fulfilling temporary desires. This does not mean that the other person was not valuable or worthy of love. It simply means that the man in question was never capable or willing to give it. It is important to note that while this behavior can feel personal, it often has more to do with the man's own limitations than anything the other person did wrong. When someone ghosts or lies after getting what they wanted, it is not because the other person was not good enough. It is because the man was not capable of offering more. Recognizing this can help shift the perspective from self-blame to understanding that some people simply lack the emotional maturity to handle relationships properly. For those who have been ghosted or lied to in this way, the best response is not to chase after answers or closure from someone who was never truly invested. Instead, it is to recognize the red flags early on and set boundaries to protect oneself in the future. A man who is genuinely interested will show consistent effort, communicate openly, and invest in the relationship beyond just fulfilling his own desires. If someone disappears after getting what they wanted, it is a clear sign that they were never truly committed in the first place. The best way to handle this situation is to focus on personal growth and self-respect. When someone ghosts or lies, it is a reflection of their character, not the worth of the person they left behind. Moving forward, it is important to look for partners who demonstrate emotional intelligence, integrity, and a genuine desire to build something meaningful. Ghosting and lying may be common, but they are not the standard for healthy relationship. The right person will stay not because they got what they wanted, but because they truly value the connection and the person they are with. When a man ghosts or lies in a relationship, one of the hardest truths to accept is that he may have never been that into you in the first place. This can be incredibly painful to realize, especially if he showed signs of interest early on, led you to believe he cared, or made you feel special. However, some men engage in relationships for reasons that have nothing to do with deep emotional connection. Instead, they may enjoy the attention, the convenience, or the temporary excitement of being with someone, but deep down, they are not truly invested. Once they reach a point where continuing the relationship requires real effort or commitment, they disappear because they were never emotionally attached to begin with. One of the key reasons men ghost or lie when they were never truly interested is that they enjoy the benefits of the relationship without wanting the responsibility that comes with it. Some men like having someone to talk to, someone to spend time with, or someone who makes them feel good about themselves. They enjoy the dynamic as long as it serves their needs, but when it starts to require more effort, such as emotional availability, deeper conversations, or planning for the future, they realize they are not actually committed. Instead of being honest about their lack of real interest, they take the easier way out by ghosting or lying, avoiding difficult conversations and emotional accountability. In many cases, men who were never that into you will still behave in ways that seem affectionate and caring, making it hard to tell how they truly feel. They might text frequently, spend time together, and even make romantic gestures, but their actions are often surface level. They engage just enough to keep things going without actually building a meaningful bond. This can create confusion, as the person on the receiving end may believe the connection is strong, only to be left blindsided when the man suddenly disappears or starts being dishonest. The truth is, these men were never deeply invested. They were just going along with the relationship for as long as it was convenient or enjoyable for them. Another factor is that some men enter relationships out of boredom or loneliness rather than genuine interest. They might engage with someone because they do not want to be alone, or because they enjoy the comfort and companionship, even if they do not see a future. When a man is with someone just to fill a void, he is not truly into them. He is into the way they make him feel in the moment. Once his circumstances change, whether he meets someone else or simply no longer feels the need for company, he disappears because he was never attached to the person in a meaningful way. Some men also ghost or lie because they do not want to admit the truth, that they were never that interested. Telling someone directly, "I was never that into you," feels harsh and uncomfortable, so they avoid the conversation altogether. Instead of being honest about their feelings, they choose to fade away, leaving the other person with unanswered questions and emotional distress. This avoidance is not about protecting the other person's feelings. It is about protecting themselves from the discomfort of confrontation. They would rather ghost or tell a convenient lie than deal with the reality of explaining their lack of emotional connection. Another sign that a man was never that into you is inconsistency. If he was interested one day but distant the next, if he only reached out when it was convenient for him, or if he never made an effort to integrate you into his life, these were all signs that his interest was not genuine. When someone truly cares, they make an effort to show it consistently, not just when they are bored or in the mood for attention. Many men who were never that into someone keep the relationship at a surface level, never going deep emotionally, never making future plans, and never prioritizing the other person in a meaningful way. When the time comes to step up and show real commitment, they back out, leaving the other person feeling confused and hurt. For some men, the reason they ghost or lie despite never being truly interested is that they like keeping their options open. They might have been seeing multiple people or waiting for someone else to come along, and when they find what they consider a better opportunity, they leave without explanation. This does not mean the person they ghosted was not good enough. It simply means that the man in question was never fully invested in the first place. His actions were not about the other person's worth. They were about his own lack of commitment and inability to be upfront. The painful truth is that when a man is genuinely interested in someone, he does not ghost or lie. He does not leave them wondering where they stand, make excuses, or disappear without explanation. A man who truly cares makes an effort to communicate, to be present, and to build something real. If someone ghosts or lies, it is a clear indication that they were never that emotionally invested, and as difficult as it may be to accept, it is better to know sooner rather than later. For those who have experienced being ghosted or lied to by someone who was never truly into them, the best response is not to chase after closure or try to prove their worth. Instead, the focus should be on recognizing the signs early on and not settling for someone who is only half-heartedly involved. When someone's actions show that they are not genuinely interested, it is better to walk away rather than hold on to false hope. A person who truly values a relationship will never leave the other person questioning where they stand. Ultimately, while ghosting and lying can feel personal, they often have nothing to do with the person who is left behind and everything to do with the emotional immaturity or selfishness of the one who disappeared. The best way to move forward is to acknowledge the truth, let go of anyone who does not reciprocate genuine effort, and make space for someone who will truly care and invest in a meaningful connection.